morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Tributes and condolences from around the country and around the world are pouring in following the death of George H.W. Bush late Friday at his home in Houston, Texas. On Monday, his body will be flown on Air Force One here to Washington, where he will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol. A state funeral at Washington National Cathedral will take place on Wednesday, and then he will return to Texas, where he will be buried next to his wife Barbara and their daughter Robin. President Trump declared Wednesday a national day of mourning. That means the stock market and the federal government will be closed down in honor of the 41st president. Joining us now, our former Face the Nation moderator and now CBS News contributor Bob Schieffer and CBS This Morning co-host Norah O'Donnell. It's so good to have the both of you here as we look back at the life and legacy of the man that we refer to as 41. Bob, I know you have taken a look there at his life.
You know, Margaret, I think it's fair to say that George Herbert Walker Bush did nearly everything you can do in life and in politics in his 94 years. As a Navy pilot, he was shot down in combat during World War II. He founded a successful business, had 6 kids, was a congressman, ambassador to the UN, head of the CIA, and our first envoy to China. And in 1980, he was ready to go for the big prize, the presidency. He got off to a great start. He won the Iowa caucuses. I interviewed him the morning after, and frankly, I couldn't figure out what he was talking about.
We will have forward Big Mo on our side, as they say in athletics.
Big Mo?
Yeah, Mo momentum.
Unfortunately for Bush, Ronald Reagan reorganized his campaign, and Bush's Big Mo became Little Mo, and Reagan rolled to the nomination. But in a move that surprised everyone, he chose Bush as his running mate. Bush became the ideal vice president for 8 years, doing what vice presidents do. Like a minor character in a play, passing across the stage on errands that had little to do with the plot. He ran for president when Reagan left office, but his campaign got off to a terrible start. George Bush was a nice man, modest, kind, a man who actually wrote thank you notes. Trouble was, some mistook niceness for weakness. The question, are you tough enough, was asked of him repeatedly.
I equate toughness with moral fiber, with character, with principle, with demonstrated leadership in tough jobs where you emerge, not bullying somebody, but with the respect of the people you led. That's toughness. That's fiber. That's character. I've got it, and if I happen to be decent in the process, that should not be a liability.
The one-time fighter pilot found himself depicted on the cover of Newsweek magazine as a wimp. To change his image in New Hampshire, he traded the coat and tie for a tractor hat and a windbreaker, and drove every piece of heavy machinery he could find. It worked. He won the Republican nomination and made 2 promises. First,
Read my lips. No new taxes.
And second, an administration based on American values.
I want a kinder and gentler nation.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Bush beat Michael Dukakis in a landslide, but by that time, the world beyond our shores was changing. The Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union was imploding. Because of his temperament and long experience in foreign policy, Bush kept belligerency and boasting down, and the situation cool. And in 1990, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, Bush put together a remarkable multi-nation coalition that drove him back to his own borders. Bush's popularity went through the roof, and his re-election was a foregone conclusion. But as the nation's deficit ballooned, he bit the bullet and raised taxes. The move worked and the economy got better, but many Republicans never forgave him for breaking his no new taxes promise. And he lost the '92 election in a 3-way race with Ross Perot and Bill Clinton. In time, he saw sons George and Jeb elected to governorships, and George as our 43rd president. George H.W. Bush was perhaps the most modest man ever to hold the presidency. His proudest legacy, he always said, was that his kids still came home to see him, and his greatest achievement was marrying Barbara, who died earlier this year after 73 years of marriage. Margaret.
I love that look back. Norah, I know that you spent time with H.W.'s son, George W. Bush, our 43rd president, and some of that will be airing tonight on 60 Minutes. Let's take a look.
You said that watching his presidency and the criticism that he got as president helped you.
Yeah, I did, because first of all, being the child of a president is unpleasant. I mean, you watch somebody you love get lampooned or made fun of or harshly criticized, it hurts. And so by the time I became president, you know, I had a fair amount of asbestos on my skin, and it didn't hurt nearly as much, it turns out. You know?
It's like fire retardant?
Exactly, fire retardant.
Did it bother your father to see you criticized while you were in office?
It did. In the end, though, you know, we both knew that's part of the job. I mean, which is actually good, you know, for the country. I mean, you want your powerful people to be held up to scrutiny.
When you look back at your father's term in office as president, he starts to many people look better and better.
Yeah, we all do. That's the way time works.
And Norah, I know you spoke with other former presidents. I mean, so few people can even begin to relate to what it's like to be in the Oval Office. What did you learn from some of these formers?
Well, tonight on 60 Minutes, you will hear from 3 former presidents, a rare occurrence in itself. And from George W. Bush, his son, there is not only a reverence for his father, but I think the point he tries to make is that we are mourning something greater than one man in some ways. We are mourning an ideal, because President George H.W. Bush was the last of the greatest generation, a man who in every one of his decisions put country above himself. John Meacham has said that to his biographer, that in every one of those decisions, he tried to choose the country first, a la the decision to raise taxes, which ultimately cost him his own re-election and arguably led to a fracturing of the Republican Party that has lasted until today. But in George W. Bush, he talks too about the decisions his father made. You know, talking about reshaping a global world order as one of the most consequential presidents in American history. So, and there's some fun stories that have never been told before that you'll hear as well tonight.
Bob, you were telling me something similar to what Norah just picked up on there, that for you, you saw H.W. as a public servant more than a politician per se.
Well, the fact is he was a much better public servant than he was a politician, because it was part of his upbringing. His mother had brought him up saying, we never brag on our own achievements. That's just something that the Bushes don't do. So it was always hard for George H.W. Bush to push his own case, because he thought it reflected poorly on him.
He also suffered an enormous loss in his life, multiple occasions, you know, from when he was the youngest pilot in the Navy. He lost his 2 crewmates. That haunted him for his entire life. He lost his daughter at the age of 3. He lost his first 2 Senate races. He lost a presidency. There are so many losses throughout his life that I think many people can relate to having own loss in their life. But how did he deal with those losses, that resilience that also I think shaped in some ways his humility?
Bob, you knew the Bush family for decades. What was he like as a person?
He was just a nice person. I mean, if you would be around him, he'd say, how about a cup of coffee? Or, you know, I mean, he was just a regular guy. And his son was very much like him. I was listening to Norah's interview there. You know, presidents come under fire. And when George Bush would come under fire, people say, oh, it's too bad. And you know what he always said? He said, nobody asked me to run for office. I decided to do this. This is part of it.
Bob, Norah, thanks to both of you. We will see you later in the show. And be sure to tune in for tonight's 60 Minutes for more of Norah's interview with George W. Bush. We'll also hear, as she said, from former Presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama on George H.W.'s legacy.